My name's Al Frisbee, and I was recently a city councilman in Merriam. I just gave that up last night after 8 years. I see a lot of city council people. Would you raise your hand, please, if you're in city council? Look at all those people. Thank you very much for being here. Ed and I got together, maybe 3 or 4 months ago at a gathering, and I leaned over and said, Ed, would you like to present this to a number of people? And we'll get you going. I have access to about 950 people. This is how many show up. So what does that tell you? So Ed said, sure, be glad to talk about the hypothetical dark store theory. And I really didn't know that much about it. David Neal is here. He's on the city council, and he knows quite a bit about it. So we're going to get these two guys to talk and ask questions a little bit later. We're going to open it up for questions, and we probably should have about a half hour. We got to get out of here about 15 to 8 to kind of satisfy the librarians. So does anyone have a question?
How many people are on the BOTA, and what is the governor's thinking about all of this as she appoints new members?
There's another one here if I can turn it on. The question was how many members on the Board of Tax Appeals? Is that right? Yes. There are 3 plus an executive director. One of them has to be an appraiser, one of them an attorney, one of them a CPA. And, I don't know. It's the governor's opinion. It's the governor's responsibility to make those appointments. I hope and I think she understands what's happening at the Board of Tax Appeals, and I hope she doesn't agree with it, but I don't know.
Hold the microphone a little bit closer.
Okay.
Just as a follow-up to that, what are their terms? How long are they actually appointed? So how quickly could it turn over?
I don't know exactly what their terms are, but 2 of them will be up this January. The other 2 will be up in 2021 January. So the governor will have opportunity to completely change the Board of Tax Appeals members in the next year. Yeah. Are they 4 years? Somebody said? Okay, all right.
So I'm curious about, for instance, the boarded up Kmart on Shawnee Mission Parkway, and how is that valued right now?
It's valued vacant, and the value is very low. I don't know what it is. But any store that's empty, that's vacant, the value will go down quite a bit.
And is that the value that they want? That they want?
No, not necessarily. However, there is I should have mentioned this. Many times these large retailers, when they lease property, they'll put a requirement in the lease that no other similar retailer can occupy that property. And it's a deed restriction, which is common. There was a situation in Olathe where Walmart had a store at a particular busy intersection with that kind of deed restriction. They closed that store and moved about a mile away and built a big super Walmart. And they contended that the new one should be valued as the old one was. There was a nonprofit, there was a secondary retailer, a small retailer in the old property. And they said that's the real value of our property. So there is a connection. And I was told in Riley County that there was a grocery store who appealed their valuation, and they used a shopping center in Iowa that was completely closed and abandoned as their point of valuation. So, but no. In Johnson County, if there's a vacant property, it's valued as vacant property and the value is way down.
Okay, we got another question here.
Yeah. So I'm speaking from a different perspective. My family owns developments. We're developers and real estate managers. on commercial properties. So I'm looking at the numbers for the target at Blue Valley, for example. I've been following the story for a little while. In 2015, they were valued at $9.7 million, and in 2016, that went to $18.2 million. I think if any of us, we use the example of the houses, if my house went from being worth $250,000 one year to $500,000 the next year, that would be a pretty significant impact on me. So I can see the perspective, but I ride the line of who to be on the side of here, because I get it, the tax implication for the rest of us is really, really huge. Why was there not a more gradual increasing of that property valuation to maybe lessen the effect, and maybe then, I don't know, maybe the lawsuits wouldn't have happened?
Good point. The reason why is because the state statute does not allow it. In my judgment, in something like that, there should be an ability to step up from $60 to whatever it is. But state statute does not allow it, and the county appraiser has to make one jump. And that new value was based upon an independent third-party professional appraiser of like stores across the county. But good point. And I think if the state would change and allow the county appraisers to do a step up in value in situations like that, it'd be a good step.
Thank you. Another question here.
Commissioner, you've painted a pretty fanciful and scary picture here tonight. Fortunately, most of it's not true. I'll narrow my question to two big issues. One of them is that the Board of Tax Appeals says Johnson County is not following the law. Retailers are not asking for special treatment. They are asking the county to follow established law. That's been, and there's tax attorneys in the room who can attest to this. I'm not one, but I know how to read the decision. This is something that has been fabricated according to a lot of different publications and tax experts. The other thing I'd like you to address is when you're scaring people by saying money would have to be given back and over time, and that they're getting their valuations increased. You didn't tell people that all they're doing is first asking you to follow the law, and as the lady before me just mentioned, first you jacked up their valuations by an average of 85% on that group of parcels in the last appeal, and then they came down a little bit. The county is still, and the schools are still getting millions more. They're not just getting as much more as you'd like. So I'd like you to address that.
Sure. I understand that Americans for Prosperity, the Kansas Policy Institute, and perhaps the Kansas Chamber of Commerce have different ideas.
Yep.
But to make the allegation that I have lied is over the top, sir. You are out of order for that allegation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that
Agreed.
no. I was not allegating anything. I was saying that you are not following the law according to the Board of Tax Appeals.
Yeah, well, the Board of Tax Appeals is wrong.
He is.
Well, no, he's not. No, he's not.
Next.
So my comment as a homeowner, I've had my house in Prairie Village for 9 years last month, and my property has doubled in assessment. I agree with that. There's been a lot of new homes built around me. By square footage, I was probably low to start with, but mine has gone up as much as 20% in a single year. So if my taxes are being affected by new homes being built by me, and I'm doing nothing to my property, I would think that that same thing applies to stores. So to your comment that that residential properties aren't going up, mine has doubled in 9 years.
Yeah.
Is there a question in there?
In the past, there have been residential properties, especially in the northeast part of the county, that have gone up 30%
Mine's
in
been
1 year.
20% year over year.
Yeah.
To a total of.
Again, that's based upon comparable sales in that market. Yeah.
I didn't know anything about the situation you were talking about until my wife dragged me here tonight. But from your description of the situation and who's been in favor of it. You mentioned Alec, and I think Chamber of Commerce, and I assume you were referring to previous Republican governors of Kansas as far as appointing the Board of Tax Commission people. So I don't mean this to be funny, but it sounds like you're saying vote Democrat.
I'm saying what?
It sounds like you're saying vote Democrat, vote for Democrats, because the people who are in favor of it are conservative groups. I don't mean this to be funny, this is just my question.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying vote for anybody. Again, the groups that I've mentioned have a particular bent that commercial property must be, commercial property values and taxation must be cut. There was a representative of the Board of Tax Appeals who spoke to a Kansas Association of Appraisers several years ago, and the message that was delivered was our responsibility, Board of Tax Appeals, is to reduce commercial values. And that's what they've been doing by 30 to 40% of the appraised values, market values. Yes.
We got a question here. I'll get you in a minute, Louis.
Ed, is there a legacy clause for people that have lived here, say, 50 years or more, that they have a cap on their
No, not
assessments?
not in Kansas. There are several things I think that could be done to create a fairer tax process in the state of Kansas. I won't enumerate those this evening, but other states have other opportunities, and we do not have them in the state of Kansas. Yeah.
We've got a question here.
Wouldn't part of a better legislative solution be to require the Board of Tax, the BOTA, to follow the same rules as the tax assessor?
Right, yes, absolutely,
I mean, just,
absolutely.
that would be the simplest legislative approach, but
Yeah. No, if the Board of Tax Appeals were required to follow the same standards as the county appraisers, yes, that would go a long ways to solving the issue.
One more question here. There's a question.
What should we as the citizens be doing to try to reach out to our legislators, I assume is the answer, to talk about this issue, try to get this changed?
Well, I would contact your legislators and, let them know your feelings on this subject. Whether or not there's a major effort in the legislature this year to do something one way or the other to adopt hypothetical values in Kansas appraisals or to reject, I don't know. But there could be, so they need to understand your concerns and what your feelings are.
Okay, we got another one here.
Yeah, hi, my name is Eric Stafford. We've been named a few times. I do work for the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, one of our lobbyists on staff, and this issue is a very important issue for our membership. And the lady who spoke a little while ago about the Target store, that was 1 out of 56 retail stores that were under appeal in the Johnson County area. And I think everybody in here put up their hand, including me, in terms of liking to see your home values drop by 30 to 40%. How many would like to see your home values increase by 108% if it's not necessarily the market? Okay, so, right, yours has, and maybe that's the market. So that annual increase on the big box retail, they went from their assessed valuation of $400 million to $743 million, which basically turns out to be about $20 million worth of taxes that they're paying in the local unit of government for that increase. And so it was mentioned earlier, commercial's valued at 25%, residential's valued at 11.5%. The state law and constitution, as was mentioned earlier, talked about fair market value. And it was mentioned that the law has to change and that we might be bringing legislation to change the law, but we're not, because if you look at a Kansas City Star editorial board from August 15th, 2019, so from the KC Star editorial board, it was basically making the point that there might have been a reckless decision from Johnson County government to make this gamble that the Board of Tax Appeals, the Court of Appeals, and the Kansas Supreme Court are all wrong and Johnson County government's right. And I just want to say that retailers are the only industry being picked on. The commercial property owners, in large part, are not appealing. Are there appeals here and there? Yes, but in terms of the big box retail in Johnson County, there was a Court of Appeals decision for Sedgwick County versus Target. Target won that case based on existing law. The law hasn't changed. BOTA's not changing the law. They're interpreting the law. State Supreme Court hasn't had a case for a while. I have a feeling based on the chairman's comments that some are going to be going to the Supreme Court here in the near future. But according to law, not BOTA, not Governor Brownback putting people on BOTA, according to law, as if vacant, fee simple, what is the value of the property? What is somebody willing to pay for that property? And that's just the facts. I mean, retailers had a 85, 90%, up to 100% increase in the valuation of their property. They're appealing that. In their success, they're not saying that their values aren't increasing, they're just saying they're not increasing 100%. That's all that's being challenged right now. So I think there is some misinformation out there, and I think to insinuate that we're calling you a liar is inaccurate. I think that we have the right as taxpayers and commercial taxpayers to challenge what the value of our property is and what fair market value is. But we're not asking the legislature to change the law. So if the law is fine as is, then we're not the one creating the issue. The value is property in your, the property in your county is valued at what it's valued at the end of the day. Now, government might want to raise X, and they got to find a way to get to X. But if that's not what the property's worth, then they have a hard way of getting there. So from our perspective, I think that we continue to have success in court. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, appreciate the opportunity to listen here, and again, look up that Casey Star editorial board. It's a good piece and window into what took place over the last few years here in Johnson County. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Just a minute.
Can I ask a question?
Just a minute. Thank you for those comments. Quite frankly, I think I stated at the outset that I would support any property owner to appeal their appraised values, whether it's before BOTA or any place else. What I do oppose is using hypothetical conditions, hypothetical lease, dark store theory to appeal that process. And thank you for bringing up the Wichita lawsuit. If you will talk with county commissioners in Wichita and read closely what the appeals court said, Target appealed to the Board of Tax Appeals. The Board of Tax Appeals said that the appraiser in that county could not even justify in any way the appraisal on the property. The case should never have been appealed. The appeals court basically said, we only have one value to look at, and that's the Board of Tax Appeals. So to say that that's a precedent-setting decision is really over the top. Thank you very much for your comment.
Hey, David, you want to say?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question and make a comment also. Yes. With an income producing property, you have, again, I think the legal issue here, and I would agree to, and I'm not an attorney, but the statutes.
Neither am I. I just sleep well at night.
The Kansas statutes talk about, establishing fair market value. Wouldn't it be true that in order to have a market transaction, you have to have a willing buyer at a price and a willing seller at that price to come up with a true market value? Since we're not actually selling these properties, we're trying to simulate a sale. If you only look at the hypothetical value to the buyers out there and not the value to the owner and the value of the future income stream in some manner that owner is receiving for this property, you're not looking at the whole picture.
Are you talking rental income stream, or are you talking income of the business stream?
Well,
because those are two different
right.
things. And
No,
I think
I
that's what's at issue in front of the court right now, is people arguing that because Walmart's there, the property's valued more. But if you take a casino and turn it into a retail center, does a casino and a retail center, do they have the same value?
And this is we're getting into the weeds, but it's kind of important.
Weeds matter.
No, the weeds do matter. It depends on the type of asset that you're looking at. If you're looking at, for example, in Kansas, we tax, property tax on oil and gas producing leases. That is entirely the value of those leases, is the future income.
Is that in the Constitution?
Well, it's a.
That's personal property?
Yes, it's personal property.
Not property.
Pardon?
Not property.
Not real property, yes, correct.
Okay, let's let him respond to the question. Thank you very much.
My point is that what we've got here, in my view, is we're out of balance on which side of the transaction we're looking at in trying to simulate a sale. And yeah, I agree, there may be some, obviously when you're looking at a big increase, it's going to get people's attention. That's probably not the right, approach to it. Tax departments for large companies, their executives are going to look at the metrics. Oh my gosh, our taxes in your unit went up. You guys must not be doing a good job. So those guys are going to go out and they're going to figure out a way to get the taxes reduced. And I don't fault them. That's part of it. But what we need is some guidance at the legislature to clarify some of these valuation subtleties. And that's, I think that if companies or people are trying to reduce their values, let's not mess with the valuation process. Let's adjust the assessment rates if things are too high.
All right, thank you. Another question.
We got a question here.
What's the rationale for this hypothetical decreasing the fair market value from, say, 25% to 12.5%? What's the basic rationale?
You'll have to go back to the 1990s when that constitutional amendment was passed, and the state legislature set up that value. My recollection is before that constitutional amendment was passed, residential and commercial property was assessed at 30% of market value. It was even, okay? So my view, in order to get the constitutional amendment passed, they made those changes. And now, some states, in Arizona, for instance, they had a 25% value on commercial property. Over a period of several years, they reduced that to about 18 or 17%. But that's set out in state statute.
Yeah, what I was talking about, according to the dark store theory, what's their justification for having their fair market value reduction?
Well, the whole purpose of the dark store hypothetical value is to reduce values and reduce their taxes, plain and simple.
Why?
Why? So they don't have to pay as many taxes, I've often wondered.
It's if they weren't there, right? Okay.
Go ahead.
I've often wondered, how about a hypothetical street running to these commercial properties? Is that okay with these commercial properties? How about a hypothetical fire engine showing up, or a hypothetical police officer showing up at the store? Those are services that need to be paid for, and that commercial big box stores need to pay their fair share like everybody else.
Okay, one question here.
So it's just that the businesses that we have in the buildings that we manage, if one leaves, we're left with an empty space that we still have to pay, overhead on. Then we don't have any income coming in for that. Now, a Target building like the one on Blue Valley, that's probably owned by the corporate, right? My family has one out in California that is a part of an entire complex, and it's a completely different situation. That would affect all of the tenants. If they decided to leave, it would affect all of the rest of the tenants. And so that's how that would, the dark store means if they were to not be there, how much would that building be worth, right?
Well, yes, that's the theory, but that's not the actual facts today. As to a office building which had tenant space that was not leased, that value should go down if in fact you appeal it. I had someone suggest to me a year ago that their property tax on this building went from X to triple X. And I said, I don't know the reason, but I'll try to find out. Well, at X, it was vacant. And that's why it was so low. At triple X, they had a brand new first-class tenant to that office building. And that's why the value went up. So, Al?
One more question, we've got like 10 minutes, we have to get out of here.
Okay. You gonna pick up all the chairs?
We'll try. Help, you guys can help.
In the context of this evening, we're equating property value with taxes to be paid. It's almost like a liability. We're making this equation between two different things. Sometimes, like you say, you're 15 minutes away from home, and what you really mean is you're 10 miles via surface streets. But there are two different things we're talking about. A large problem today, I think, is that people and companies have an incentive to devalue their property when it comes to taxes, but then they don't actually want their property to be worth less. They want it to be productive and to be worth a lot. They just don't want to be taxed more. Nobody likes paying more taxes. But I think it's important to keep people honest in what the properties are valued. Do you know of any municipality or any governmental regions that have any sort of penalty for going and selling your property for twice what you've tried to make it valued lower as, or by limiting the sale price of something? If that owner has fought to have it valued lower, then they want to go and sell it for twice that or more.
Not that I'm aware of. I'm a free enterprise guy, and when I look at the private sector and how they value property for all kinds of business transactions, they do not use the hypothetical value. And I think that says a lot about what's wrong with hypothetical values.
Can I summarize just real quick, and then Dave is going to say something, and we're going to be gone. But please stack some chairs before you leave. I'm glad I have my tennis shoes on today. I was walking around here. To me, and I know nothing, I'm a biology teacher, I know nothing. Parthenogenesis, CRISPR-R, I can educate you on that, but not this stuff. But I take away from this, from listening, is that you have an empty store, it's dark, because there's no lights on, there's no material in there, no merchandise. That's evaluated here. Then if you put merchandise in it, the valuation goes up. That's just logical to me, right? So why would they want to reduce it with merchandise in there? I don't understand that.
I wanted to say a couple of things that addressed a couple of questions earlier. One of them is, and it's been alluded to, but there is adjustments made for income or lack of income in the case of a store that's empty. And so looking at percentages going up and down isn't the only thing to look at. Another question was, why is the assessment rate different for commercial properties? In other words, why is the portion of the value that's exposed to property tax higher for commercial property than it is for residential property? If you look at the list in the Kansas Constitution, income-producing properties are taxed at a larger proportion of their value is subject to property tax. Well, there's a reason for that. They have, in a sense, that income-producing properties are a little different than non-income-producing properties, and they tend to use more services and more of the cost. And so there's a reasonableness that somebody decided in doing it that way. What I'm saying, end result is, if certain groups of taxpayers feel like they're being overtaxed, then the place to probably address that would be in those assessment rates. Don't go and mess around with methodologies that are already complicated and difficult enough to make them fair. If you happen to have enough money to afford the consultants to do that. And let's fight the tax level battle on the assessment rates rather than messing with the valuation methodology, which cause the possibility of large tax refunds later. We need to have a way to budget in a logical way, and we need to know what our budget's going to be. And so this is an issue. I don't know what the exact right answer is, but just to let it go on and not try to address it, I think, is potentially, risky for all of local government.
Thank you, everybody, and give them a round of applause. We hope you've learned a few things, and now spread the word. Whatever you think, spread the word. And please stack your chairs a little bit. Thank you.